or chat online at veteranscrisisline.net or text 838-255.
What you want to know. What you need to know.
Talk 1470. WNN.
The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. Welcome to the CareGiver reality show with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato, who bring you more than a combined 25 years of practical experience, helping thousands of family caregivers, helping them find solutions to the challenges and frustrations presented by this important responsibility. So if you are in the position of caring for a spouse or a parent, a loved one who is no longer able to care for themselves, or if you know someone who is, this hour will be worth the listening. Now, let's tune in to today's edition of CareGiver Reality with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato.
Good evening, South Florida, America, and the world. And this is the CareGiver Reality Hour. And I'm wishing you all a very happy, healthy new year. We're back again. And we have a phenomenal lineup of people this year, and Paul is already scheduling. I think we're scheduled out till the end of February. We're looking forward to it. We have a great guest with us tonight. You're listening to us on iHeartRadio, WWNN Radio, 1470 AM, WWNNradio.com if you're watching, caregiverreality.com, and amp2.tv. So there's no excuse not to listen or hear, as we say every week. And we have not only exciting guests, but Paul will be explaining tonight some new direction that we're taking that we think will really help to bring a lot of you a greater level of comfort in what we have to say, where we're going as far as greater advocacy for the caregiver. We really are looking forward to just really amping up what we're doing and bringing it to you. And just as we did in all of 2014, the magic question of the moment is, Paul, how was your week?
Well, good evening, David, and good evening to all of you, our listeners. Welcome back into the new year. Well, I was asked just a few minutes ago, did we make Christmas dinner? And that was a wonderful day. Suzette and Debbie, David and I went out for a wonderful buffet. Everyone had way too much, and then the bounce back occurred, and what you get in one day, you pay for over the next 2 weeks.
Right, and that is absolutely the truth.
Yeah.
And how is Debbie?
Debbie is a little bit better today, but we went through a very difficult week in this last week. I thought for sure we were going to the ER the night before. It just seems as you get one thing under control, something else begins to pop up. And as a caregiver, you just get scared out of your mind when these things happen. And fortunately, when I left tonight, she was up sitting and reading a little bit. So I got fingers and toes crossed when I get home. And how about Suzette? She looked lovely, by the way, when we went out to dinner.
Thank you. Well, the picture that you took, both of them looked great in the moment.
In the moment.
All right. You didn't go to the ER yesterday. We went last week.
Yep.
There was too much for her to eat, and the consequences of that became manifold.
And the lack thereof.
Yeah. And so finally, towards the end of this past weekend, she was feeling better, got up, played Energizer Bunny, and today, I don't think she got up till 2 o'clock this afternoon. And so she was feeling, quote, a little bit better, but there she was with Gatorade and a medication called Zofran that really is pretty heavy duty for nausea. And we'll see what 2015 brings.
I really would like to hear from those of you who are listening in who are caregivers to someone with an autoimmune disorder, such as lupus or dysautonomia. Some of your experiences this week. I think one of the chronic fatigue that accompanies not only the disease, but many of the medications that accompany the disease really took out Debbie this week. And I'm wondering, what have your experiences been with the chronic fatigue?
And that's very, very true. And when we got to the ER, even though it's our local regional hospital, when we got into the actual ER and the nurse came in and said, okay, and she went to take the computer on the wall that has the electronic medical record, and she said, well, what condition are we dealing with? And I said to her, if I say dysautonomia, will you know what I'm talking about? And she said no. So I handed her the one paragraph descriptor, but this was the interesting thing. When it went to what is your condition, and there's an automatic drop-down box that's part of the electronic medical record at the hospital, there was no dysautonomia. So we had to jury rig it for a couple of other afflictions that were close in terms of the symptoms in order to be able to get it so that Medicare could identify it and somebody could come in and treat it. She was there for about 10, 12 hours. She really needed to be hydrated, which is something that happens when dysautonomia gets out of control. And
so fluids replaced in the body by intravenous.
Right, absolutely. Okay. And she had a couple of bags full. And, well, folks, that's exactly how it comes. They don't hang bottles. And, she got home, and then we were on a pretty strict regimen of staying with the Gatorades and the other things that have electrolytes in them until she got hydrated. It took a couple of days. But thank you for asking, and, hopefully we're doing a little better this week. But as you said, and every caregiver out there knows, we never know what's going to happen, minute to minute, hour to hour. So we always have to be ready to take on the unexpected.
Absolutely.
All right. And as Paul said, if you've had an unusual experience or an interesting one that you've had with the ER at home, whatever, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at David or Paul at caregiverreality.com. You can go to the Facebook page. You can reach us in a variety of ways.
Twitter.
And so please let us hear from you, because we're trying to compile an interesting list of things that happen in real time and that just aren't somebody's story about what they did. And what's happening to you is very, very important, because it gives us direction on the kinds and type of people that we bring on to discuss whatever they may be their expertise and how they partner with caregiving. And as family caregiver experts, we want to partner with the right people to bring you the right information and the right things that you can learn so that your life might be a little bit easier. And so,
well said.
Kudos in 2015 to all those 60 to 70 million caregivers, and probably countless others that don't realize yet that they're a caregiver. So, Paul, back to you.
Well, we're now into our second year of Caregiver Reality, and David and I were thinking about, we really need to make impact, and we really need to do something to galvanize some power for the 60 to 70 million family caregivers that are out there. And we're going to take on a small challenge. What we're going to try to do is we're going to try to advocate for the world of caregivers. And I literally mean that. And it's a mantra that we're going to call Engage to Change. Engage to Change. Join us as advocates for caregivers worldwide. Be a change maker. And what I would like everyone to do who is a caregiver, who cares about caregivers, is find us on Facebook, email us, find us on Twitter, and send us a message, I'm engaging, or I'm in. Tell us your story. Go into the specifics of what's going on. Because the truth of the matter is, as we've said all year last year, there is little support. There's not enough education. There's little training. And heaven knows there's too little money to support the caregivers that are out there. And we're going to make this our cause. This is going to be our task for this coming years, are to get everyone to engage to change. And on every communication that I put out, every posting that I make, those words are going to be there with advocate for worldwide caregivers. Be a change maker. Please join us on that. Give us your thoughts. And if you would retweet it, send it to your contacts, come out, tell us what's going on. We'll make sure that we can respond in a manner that will have meaning to you. David, I am really excited about this.
I know you are, and I am too. And that's not to say. All right, sorry.
If I
yes,
may
Paul.
go back for a second.
Yep.
Sorry, David.
That's right.
I put together a picture storybook yesterday that's on all of the social media on this Engage to Change. You'll see it when you go around. So it went out yesterday, and I got a response from a gentleman, and I don't want to use names, but this is what I received yesterday, David. It says, I've been proudly serving as my mother's full-time registered caregiver for 5 years, 4 at home. This has been the best education and experience in my life. She's a full assist quad from history of brain aneurysm, stroke, and cervical laminectomy. I also have significant media background as a broadcast journalist. Please let me know how I can help your cause. These are people saying, I want to be part of this project. Come and join us. We have room for you.
Absolutely. And that's not to say that there are not people out there that care about the caregiver. There are organizations, the Family Caregiver Advocacy Organization that's out in California. There are numerous, even AARP is trying to get more and more involved in caregiving. Everybody is doing a little piece. But Paul and I have an opportunity weekly to try and be your face of caregiving, and to let the world know that as caregivers, not only are you not alone, but there's somebody here in Paul and myself, and we hope in millions of others eventually, that can make a difference. Just like with specific diseases, we hear all the time that heart disease and cancer, the rates are dropping. Why? Because billions of dollars have been spent, when only last year $500 million was spent on things like Alzheimer's. All right. Autism is becoming a major scourge in this country. How do young families figure out what to do? They're caregivers too. They're all part of the whole spectrum of caregiving. So whether it's autism as a child, Alzheimer's as a later adult, everything that happens to you as a disease creates someone in the family that's going to be a caregiver, whether they realized it or not. And we're here for you. We want to see these changes. We cannot keep going forward talking about the great job that caregivers do without giving them more than just a pat on the back. It's time, whether it's the legislator, whether it's whoever it may be, whether it's the system itself, whether it's facilities, we cannot continue to just dismiss the unpaid family caregiver and assume that they know it all, that they can advocate, that they can pick up the pieces if the system fails. And unfortunately, we see too much of the formal care system dump what they don't want to do, can't do, or aren't being paid for on the unpaid informal caregiver. And that's you, sons and daughters, you, grandchildren, you, spouses, and every other family member that raises their hand when somebody else in the family has something wrong seriously, chronically, and that requires the help of the family, even though you may never have been trained. And remember, my mantra, this is not about the flu, chicken soup, and you'll be better in a week. This is about things that last a lifetime and don't have a book on how do you do it. We're going to try and help push that envelope, raise awareness, and make things happen. That's our mantra.
So what you'll see happening in the weeks to come is that we're going to be speaking about some of the things that really are not too popular to talk about. We're going to take some positions. We're going to talk about some of the elephants that are in the room. And just to give you an example, from one of the blogs that I follow, I had posted this week in Facebook the question, Is cancer too profitable to cure? And it sparked a firestorm of response on both sides. I mean, the passion was there. But, we have to look at these questions. We have to look at the questions, patients' right to die. We have to look about questions of where is the money being spent and who's being held accountable. And as part of this Engage to Change, we are going to be at the head of the line as change masters, and we want you to be there along with us. Please email, Twitter, Facebook, Caregiver Reality, find a way, get into the march and be part of the solution.
Paul, you couldn't have said it better. Your passion for 2015 continues, and this is actually the second year for you, and it's actually the beginning of the third year for the Caregiver Reality Hour, because I didn't have the opportunity to have you when we first started out. And I must say to all of our listeners and people watching, I couldn't ask for a better partner, a better caregiver advocate, and somebody who helps support me in what I do as a personal caregiver. So, Paul, thank you again, and let's hope that this is the year that, A, our lives get a little bit better and that we get a little bit wiser. But more importantly, we are going to continue the crusade, and here we are. It's the 6th of January, and we have another 359 days, and we're hoping to see a change by the time next New Year's Eve comes, that we have rallied support, raised visibility, and made the caregiver at the front of the line and not just the clinical system.
And I appreciated, David, about your kind words about being partner and the things that we do.
Well, you paid me.
I did. But, we want to see your hands in our hands. We want you to help us fight for you. Because if we don't do it, as the 60 to 70 million of us, shame on us.
Yep.
We are not advocating for the ones that we care for. And we are not only the silent majority, we are the invisible majority, because we're too busy day to day doing what we need to do. We're going to be your voice.
All right. And I think as soon as we can, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking to Lynette Johnson,
Great.
who is in the studio with us. And she is a very interesting person. She is an ombudsperson here in Palm Beach County, and she's the one, when you make a complaint about a facility, she's the lady cop that shows up.
Amen.
All right, so we'll take a break now. Thank you, Kenny.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse or loved one who can no longer take care of himself or herself? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Do you feel burned out, frustrated, and just don't know where to turn? You've tried doctors, lawyers, and mental health professionals and have come to realize that they don't have practical answers to these questions. What you need are experts, non-clinical family caregivers with 25 years of active experience helping thousands of family caregivers like yourself. People who can help you provide a better quality of life for yourself and your loved one. Who you need are David Levy or Paul Vadiato. Reach David at david@caregiverreality.com or reach Paul at caregiverreality.com and let them help you pick the right path towards improving the quality of life for you, the caregiver, and your loved one.
This is Paul Vadiato, co-host of the Caregiver Reality Hour. Be sure to join us Tuesdays at 5 p.m., 1470 a.m. on your radio dial, iHeartRadio, or live stream on caregiverreality.com/live show. Be sure to visit us on our website, caregiverreality.com, and like us on Facebook. Join the conversation.
This is Caregiver Reality with gerontologist David Levy and caregiver expert Paul Vadiato, who ask you to call in and speak with him on the air toll-free at 888-565-1470. That's 888-565-1470 to share a story or important information. Now, back to today's Caregiver Reality Show.
And we're back, and it's the Caregiver Reality Hour, and the year is 2015, and it's January 6th, and we are just busting to make a change in what's happening to the family caregiver. I want to thank once again Arden Court for their continuing support as a sponsor. Scott Solkoff, one of the most eminent elder law attorneys in the state and nationally, for his support for us, and everybody else that's out there that has made a difference in keeping us on the air. I'd like to thank Freddie, our producer, and all those people behind the scenes that you don't see that make a difference in keeping us here.
And the best is yet to come.
The best is yet to come. One of the things that I'm working on right now, there is a wonderful organization based out of Houston, Texas called the Senior Citizens Bureau, and they have about somewhere between 400 and 500,000 members. And they want to come on board starting in another month or so, not only as a sponsor, but they've asked you and I to help them to create a caregiving capability for them that can be run out of a call center. And so in my earlier days in this business for 10 years, I ran a call center exclusively focused on the family caregiver. So I'm walking down some paths that I at least know kind of where the bodies are buried. But
Tell us about our guest.
Well, our guest is Lynette Johnson, and she is a dementia trainer specialist, ombudsman, and support group facilitator. And I'm going to be lucky next week. She's going to come and sit in on my support group that we do at Grand Villa every Wednesday and critique me.
I hope you get a good report card.
I hope I need to get a good report card. She is a state of Florida approved assisted living facility Alzheimer's disease and related disorders training provider, and a University of South Carolina certified dementia dialogues trainer and dementia specialist. Now, these are things that we're going to ask you about because I want to know what a certified dementia dialogue specialist is all about. She retired, even though she only looks to be about 32, in 2008 as a senior software engineer. After 28 years, she started at age 4 in the computer industry to pursue her passion of helping others with dementia. She was her mother's caregiver until her passing from complications from Alzheimer's in 2006 and has worked in many memory care units as an activity director. Upon moving to Florida, she became an ombudsman or ombudsperson and advocates for people residing in long-term care facilities. Recently, she's begun to volunteer work as a support group facilitator for the Alzheimer's Association. She also has a class where she teaches family members and family caregivers about dementia. Lynette, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
And Paul, why don't you take over?
Yes, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. With all of those things on your plate, it's a miracle you have time to cook dinner at night for yourself.
My husband cooks the dinner.
Even better. So tell us, since it's a new term to many of us, what is an ombudsman program, and exactly what is it that you do?
Okay, sure. An ombudsman, the definition of an ombudsman, is one that helps on the behalf of others. Mm-hmm. So as a long-term care ombudsman, I am an advocate for residents that are residing in long-term care facilities. Long-term care facilities are nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and adult family care homes. Now, memory care facilities fall under assisted living facilities.
Okay. Now, this is a state program, is it not?
Yes. It's managed and run by the state. Yes.
And what is the state looking for to accomplish through this program? What is the mission that the state has on this?
Yes, our mission is to ensure the health, the safety, and the well-being of the residents in long-term care facilities.
What's your typical complaint that you would get that would activate you showing up?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Anybody can call in a complaint, resident, family member, anybody in the facility that sees a problem. But the most common complaint we have are the answering of call bells in a timely manner. That is the most common complaint.
Okay, so that somebody rings that bell and nobody shows up.
Right, exactly.
And is that a question of staffing? Or ignoring? What do you typically find to be, when you dig down, what is it that shows up in the lack of response to the call bell?
I would say mainly staffing, absolutely, lack of staff.
Okay.
That's a problem.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
Most facilities, no matter how much they try, they're still for-profit organizations, and there's
Absolutely.
only so many people they can hire.
I understand.
All right.
Now,
Paul?
David referenced this a little bit earlier when he read the introduction. Interestingly enough, the work that you do is a volunteer position. You would think that this would be something that would be a paid position. Tell us a little bit about the training and some of those certifications that an ombudsman needs to have in order to do a good job.
Sure. We are put through classroom training and field work. So there's two main functions that we serve as an ombudsman. We do facility assessments, and we do resident complaints. So we have classroom training for both of those. And then after we complete the classroom training, we are paired with a mentor, and we do 3 field assessments, and we do 3 field complaints. After we're complete with our classroom training and our field work, then we are certified.
What does an assessment look like?
An assessment looks like when we go into the facility, we look for a lot of things. We do this on an annual basis. And in between, we do just resident, where we go and we visit the residents. But when we are on an assessment, our main focus is the residents. We want to speak to as many residents as we can to find out how they're feeling about their care, if they have any complaints. We also look at the facility to make sure it's clean, it's safe for the residents. We look at the menus, and we make sure that there's a nice variety of food on the menus and alternatives. If they don't like what's being served, that there's an alternative
Or a special
available.
diet.
Or a special diet. We look at the activities calendar. We want to make sure there's a lot of diverse activities. And we want to make sure, this is very important, that we want to make sure the resident rights are posted so the residents can see them to remind them of their rights. Because this is the cornerstone of our program, is resident rights.
Protection.
Protection, exactly.
Now, when I go to an assisted living facility, especially assisted living dementia, there's always that book that's out on the front counter.
Oh, to sign in?
No, not to sign in,
Not to
but
sign
either
in.
it was a JACO inspection or an assessment. Now, does that, and then it says you scored this or you have, 2 demerits against you until you fix
Right.
it. Is that from you folks or is that from a different organization?
No, that's from ACA, which is the Agency for Healthcare Administration.
Okay.
Yes, thank
and
you.
so what do they do that you don't do? Or what do you do that they don't do? Is
Well,
it that
we
you're
are-
more resident focused?
Exactly. We're more focused on the resident. It's not to say they're not, but they know what to look for as far as they go. They dig deeper than we do. They look for like the temperature of the refrigerator, or they really dig into the residents' charts and or medication issues. So they really dig deep, and they're paid employees. So they might get a little bit more training or.
I see.
Lynette, we learn best by stories, and I know you've been doing this for quite a while, and you talked about complaints. Can you give us some examples of situations that you were called into and what you found and what ended up ultimately happening?
Without names.
Without names.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
no names. Absolutely.
Protect the innocent.
Absolutely. Well, I have a story. It's a little lengthy.
Go ahead.
Okay. My most recent complaint was for a Holocaust survivor. She was in the memory care unit, and she did not belong in the memory care unit. Unfortunately, she gave her power of attorney to her son, who did not have her best interest at heart. And long story short, she has a daughter up north that does have her best interest, so she revoked her power of attorney with her son. But what happened is the house doctor, typically in these large facilities, they have their own doctors that come in, and which makes it convenient for the residents, but the residents do have a right to choose their own doctor. This resident went to her own doctor, and she was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, which, as you know, is not dementia. And she was declared competent to make her own decisions by her doctor. The house doctor declared her incompetent. So she could not, so the facility would not recognize the revocation of the power of attorney because she was declared incompetent. Now, when I went to see her, when we get a complaint, we go in and we investigate the complaint. And the first thing we go and we interview the resident to find out what they think. And she was adamant. She wanted to go home. She revocated that power of attorney, and she wanted to go home. Her daughter picked out a facility that is Jewish. She wanted to be with her people again. And one of the worst parts is that her son wanted to have her cremated, told her, I want to have you cremated. And that just horrified her because she escaped, as she quoted,
the death camps,
the Nazi ovens.
Right.
So armed with this, the first thing we do, and is very important in our program, is we get consent. We got to make sure we get consent from the resident to advocate for them. We do not announce their names. We don't go to manager. We don't investigate and advocate for them until we get consent. So this woman, she looked me in the eye. She was lucid. I got the report from her doctor saying that she was competent. So armed with this information, I go to top management. I always go to the administrator, and basically I got her to go home.
Wonderful.
Great. That's a good story.
I got her to go home. She
How long did this take for you to get accomplished?
2 days.
Wow.
2 days.
That's
Yeah.
terrific.
That is awesome.
The daughter was thrilled because she hired a lawyer, and she said, you got done in 2 days what my lawyer couldn't get done in 2 months.
Wow.
Right. Well, excuse me, Paul, that's a very complicated situation because there's a difference between medical competence and legal capacity. And many times people with mild cognitive impairment or maybe even early Alzheimer's still have the ability to sign a document if, in the opinion of the attorney, not that they knew every little bit of the content, but that they had the sense and, you turned around and said, now, if you do this, it'll allow your daughter to take better care of you. Is that what you would like? And if they feel that they're getting a cognitive yes. And I have seen what you are talking about happen many times with an outside doctor versus a facility doctor who's yanked the rug out from under for whatever the reasons, be they one of medical difference or technical specialty. It's one thing if you went out to the neurologist and he said, no, this is mild cognitive impairment, and you've got essentially a general practitioner / geriatrician making that same determination. And so you don't know if it's turf wars or what actually brings that difference about. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, and the patient is in the middle, unfortunately. You told me earlier that you were a caregiver to your mom before she passed with dementia, Alzheimer's type of situations. And what you said to me was, I wish I knew then what I know now. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I'm sure there are many of our listeners who are in that very situation.
Absolutely. As we discussed too, hindsight is 20/20. When my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I thought I knew everything about the disease. It's just a problem with the memory, right? But it would have made the journey a lot easier for myself and for my mom if I would have gotten educated on the disease. Knowledge is power when it comes to these diseases. So I wish I would have gotten educated so I would have handled some situations differently.
For example?
For example, when she said, I want to go home, when I first put her in a facility, I wouldn't say, this is your home. If I was educated and I knew all the tips and techniques on how to address them and keep the person calm, I would have addressed that situation differently. Absolutely.
And that's something that in the support groups we talk about all the time. When people get frustrated and angry, I said, remember, you're not fighting with your mother, you're fighting with the disease.
Exactly.
And that's something
yes.
that people do not realize until they've really been in it for a while, because they just imagine their loved one to be still the same person, notwithstanding the diagnosis,
Right.
hoping that they can use logic, and come on, Mom, you know better than that. Well, no, they don't.
I think we really need to break it down simpler. What we're really talking about is a brain disease.
Absolutely. And you can't see the damage. So it's very hard to understand
No.
what's going on because
There's no
you can't
sling
see. Right. I mean, it's easy to understand when somebody doesn't have any legs. You wouldn't ask that person to walk, but yet when someone has a brain disorder like Alzheimer's, we expect them to act normal.
Because they look normal.
They look normal, absolutely. And in the beginning stages, as you know, they can be very sociable, and it's very hard to tell sometimes that they have Alzheimer's.
And, this is no different with kids that have, like, dysautonomia, what my wife has. They look perfectly normal.
Or on the spectrum of
Or
autism.
on the spectrum of autism. The kids look perfectly fine, so are they a discipline problem? Are they just not listening?
Right.
And, they could have a hearing problem, but aren't smart enough yet to tell you because they never heard. But although we're getting better at diagnosing that at birth.
Well, also, with cognitive impairment, sometimes it's not a disease. It could be a urinary tract infection
Absolutely.
or depression, medication reactions. Really, there's a multiplicity of reasons why that might be there.
Right.
That's why it's very important to get an accurate diagnosis, a thorough diagnosis, because it's very subjective. It can be very subjective.
And you have to be careful not to sweep everything under the Alzheimer's rug either.
Right.
Because in many cases, these are folks that are 60, 65, 75, 80, and they have other conditions, all right?
You just put you and I in a group.
Yeah, but fortunately at the moment, we're not dealing with dementia in its classic sense. But yes, but we can't forget that these people also have, quote, other afflictions that may be playing upon the fact, and I learned with my wife and dysautonomia not to just put everything under dysautonomia and not assume that there may not be something else going on.
Absolutely.
All right,
yeah.
that didn't fit under that.
And that's not any different than a child who's on the spectrum of autism, who's a teenager. You can't blame everything on the autism. Sometimes they're just a teenager being a teenager.
Right, and it's a question of brain development as well as their own innate capability as hindered by autism.
Lynette, recognizing that each state has its own set of rules and laws, and we're heard in all 50 states and beyond into other countries, cameras that families might want to place to keep an eye on their loved ones. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely, yes. This is a very important subject that I'm pushing as an ombudsman. Currently in the United States, there's only a handful of states that have legislation that allow a family member to put a video camera in their loved one's room.
You mean in a facility?
In a facility, yes, absolutely in a facility. The rest of the states, so only a handful of states have this legislation. So we were pushing for more states to get this legislation. We feel it's very important, particularly when you're talking about abuse, because a lot of abuse occurs in the room, because that's where the care is being given. So yes, we need legislation. Anybody out there listening, please call your local representative.
Engage to change.
Engage to change. Granny cams. We want granny cams.
All right, now let me ask you this question. In many facilities that you go to, people are in semi-private rooms. Mm-hmm. So the issue of privacy of the other
Absolutely.
patient in the room
Could be an issue.
Or resident in the room. Mm-hmm. It's not everybody that gets a private room.
Right.
So how do you attempt to reconcile some of those privacy and what might be called HIPAA issues against what would potentially help to avoid abuse?
Well, you would have to get permission from the family or the resident, the resident. You would have to get permission and have them knowingly know that you're putting the camera there.
All right. Well, I can see this is going to be one of those change issues that's going to be an uphill push.
Well,
because
technology is always going to be moving forward.
Right. And you're absolutely correct. And, and one day maybe you'll have something in your pocket and only focuses on the
Absolutely,
individual.
yeah, exactly.
And,
I mean, look how small cameras are now.
Right.
Yes.
You referenced abuse, and abuse takes many different forms: physical, emotional, neglect, financial, verbal. I mean, from what you've seen, how large of a problem is it?
Well, basically, there's two kinds of abuse: the physical and the psychological. The psychological is what's really hard to measure because it can be very subtle. It could be where they don't take the resident to an activity, or they always take them into the dining room late, or just their attitude. So that kind of abuse is very subtle and very hard to measure. And so is physical abuse. I just read where 1 out of 20 residents are abused in some form, but out of that, 5 or 6 go unreported. So it is a large problem.
You're talking physical abuse? Because a lot of times we'll get a complaint. I know I've heard that, mom showed up with black and blue marks on her arm. And it wasn't that somebody was out to abuse her, but, they needed to pull her off the toilet, or whatever, and they wound up getting abused, all right, or they wound up showing physical symptoms that are subject, as you said, to interpretation as to what went on.
Yes,
and so abuse can sometimes be in the eye of the beholder, and not so easy for somebody like yourself to discern exactly what were the underlying circumstances unless it's repetitive. Would that be correct?
That's correct. And also it depends on the resident, how competent they are in their mind as far as remembering the time, the day. Unfortunately, a lot of these residents are very vulnerable, and they might have dementia. Yeah, they have dementia, so they can't tell you. So it's a difficult problem. It's a difficult problem to assess.
Lynette, to our caregivers out there who are listening, what are some of the red flags or the warning signs that they should be keeping their eye on when they have a loved one that is in a facility?
Sure. Well, if they do have their mind and they do have the capacity, you want to assure your loved one when they're in a facility that, please tell me when. Don't be scared to tell me if something happens, if someone abuses you. So you want to keep the lines of communication open. If they don't have the capacity to tell you, then you do have to look for these signs of bruising, personality changes,
bed sores.
Oh yes, definitely.
Losing weight,
recoiling away, or a dislike towards a certain staff member.
Mm-hmm.
So these are some of the signs.
Right.
You got to observe and really look at what's happening. David?
Absolutely. We're going to continue on with this. We're not going to take a break because this is a fascinating conversation, but I do want everybody to know that next week we have on a retina specialist, and there's a lot of folks out there that have glaucoma and situations that truly require a specialist. And while we don't normally get into a lot of medical issues, this was one that we felt very strongly about. And one of the reasons that we did is because many years ago, when you talk about storytelling, my father, may he rest in peace, was about 76 years old, a few years older than I am now. And he had glaucoma, and he was going to a very prestigious facility that was in Miami that everybody would know, but doesn't need, formalization from me. And he was complaining that his eyesight was failing very quickly. And he had what was called wet macular degeneration. So there was bleeding in the back of the eye on the retina. And so everybody, once again, swept everything under the glaucoma rug. And I was with him one day, and there were 3 specialists there, and there was a young resident who had just come on board with them. And he was a little bit hesitant, and I said to him, "Would you examine my father?" not that I didn't feel, very comfortable with all of the specialists.
A resident
Being somebody who has graduated from medical school and is finishing up their particular specialty, all right, as a resident, and he happened to have been at this facility doing his residency. And he looked at my father, and he did something that was absolutely ABC. He did what was called a field acuity test, which meant, what was my dad's peripheral vision? And he said, he doesn't have any peripheral vision. You know what? He's got something going on inside of his brain and not just his eyes. And lo and behold, they finally did, an image of his brain, and he had something called hemangioma, all right, which is a benign growth that starts on the inside of the lining of your brain and grows down. And what was happening was it was compressing his brain. And they couldn't see it by looking at in his eye, because that part of it was the pressure was causing the bleeding. So when we discovered that, we looked around in Florida. There wasn't anybody that was a specialist. To be real quick, we took him out to Moffitt Hospital in San Francisco, which is part of the University of California medical system. They had a specialist there. And what was going to be 4 hours of surgery turned into 14. And when he finally, fortunately, he was a track runner and he had the endurance. But the bottom line was, he told us afterwards that he had never seen someone, a living brain, that compressed. And that he ran to get the cameras, and my dad is in a couple of ophthalmological medical books and journals. But it was this young man who was doing his residency who went back to the basics, as opposed to the assumptions of the specialists who had been seeing him all along. And were it not for that, as it is, they removed it, and his brain eventually expanded back to where it belonged, and he was fine. I mean, he lived to be 88. But here again was an example of assumption and the experts, and taking nothing away from them. But sometimes you got to go back to the basics, and you ask the guy who's the newbie, take a look, and that was what he was so used to doing. That's how we found it. And so next week we have on a specialist, and I'm very anxious to hear
Dr.
what he
Tanny from the Florida Retina Institute, one of the top
He's
facilities.
Going to be fascinating, but I wanted to let people know that was my retina story.
Yeah,
and I didn't want to say it in front of him because I don't want to impugn a specialist's credibility, but there was a perfect example of sweeping under the rug.
Yeah, and it's also a perfect example of being an advocate. That, you did all that you could in order to help your dad. Lynette, I had a situation in the complex that I live in. I guess it was last year. It was an elderly woman that was in the house, and they were aides coming in and out. The aides were having parties. There was a lot going on. And the son was supposedly overseeing this. And all of us, including the association, wasn't sure, what is it that we should do if we suspect that a neighbor is being abused?
I would call Adult Protection Services.
And in turn, would they contact you, or because this isn't a facility, it's an individual
Well,
adult?
yes, because it's not a facility, we would not be called in.
Right. Because Paul's situation that he's describing is not unusual. I've seen people in their 90s all of a sudden turn up with a brand new car that really wasn't needed, and taking nothing away from the aides. They do a great job, but sometimes they take advantage of situations and go grocery shopping. 1 bag's for mom, 1 bag's for them. You have to be very, very careful when you entrust. And I was with my good friend today, and good friend of Paul, Scott Greenberg from Comfort Care. And I know how carefully he trains, oversees, ensures the people that he puts out. And sometimes we have to be very careful who we let in our home, and make sure that we go ahead and double check frequently, and in a surprise situation, to make sure that the abuse that you see in formal situations doesn't happen in informal ones. Paul?
Yeah, it is an issue, and no one wants to be called out and
then have a problem afterwards with a grudge
retaliation.
Neighbor. Yeah.
Absolutely.
You mentioned earlier, Lynette, about training and support groups and the kind of work that you do there. I know David has been doing support groups
forever,
and he does an excellent job. But what he's doing, can you talk a little bit about what you do in support groups and the type of training that you give?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a facilitator for support groups for caregivers that are caring for someone with dementia. I just started this, so I can't speak too much about it, but yeah, a wonderful place to get ideas. When you're on this journey of caring for somebody, it's real important to know that you're not alone in this journey. It's real important to know that typically in a support group, you're going to have people that are getting towards the end of their journey, so to speak. The person they're caring for has late-stage Alzheimer's, for instance, and a person coming in that is caring for someone with early-stage Alzheimer's, they can learn a lot from the experiences of these other people that are caring for their loved ones.
My experience has been not only exactly what you're talking about, but also even after they've lost a loved one, my caregivers come back to pass on the wisdom that they've learned in completing the whole cycle. And the other thing that you'll learn, because I have a feeling you're going to be an excellent facilitator, is caregivers join together. They become a family, and they're there for one another. Something happens to a caregiver, we all know about it within X period of time because it's like an extended family, and it is very rewarding to watch that family cohese. You see it in facilities. Even if somebody is in a dementia facility, I see it at places like Arden Court. The families are the eyes and ears. Even if you can't be there that day, there are 8 others that are
watch
keeping
out
an
for
eye.
everyone.
Exactly. And that's so important to understand as a caregiver. You're going to this group not so much to learn more about the disease, although that's important. It's to learn who you are in your role as a caregiver and how to make sure that you survive the event and don't succumb to it, because it can be very, very difficult. And I compliment you, and I can't wait to see, how you perceive our support groups and have the opportunity to attend one of yours.
Believe it or not, Lynette, we're just about rounding out to the hour, and I want to give you an opportunity to speak to our caregivers. What final thoughts would you like to leave with them? What wisdom do you have? And if they want to contact an ombudsman, wherever they may be, how do they go about doing that?
Sure. I would say learn from my experience. Use the resources out there. There's so many resources that are available for us. Adult daycares, support groups, so many resources. So use the resources, get trained, learn about the disease so you can be an effective caregiver to make this journey as easy for you as well as your loved one. In order to, if you'd like to contact the long-term care ombudsman program, if you'd like to be a volunteer, we're always looking for volunteers. There is a national ombudsman website, ltcombudsman.org. Each ombudsman is organized by state. So if you go to the national website, you can click on your state and find out the state website for the ombudsman program. Mm-hmm. And we have applications on there that you could fill out. So and then there's an interview process.
And people shouldn't hesitate, even if it's just a suspicion. Call.
Oh, absolutely. Err on the side of yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Being conservative, yes. David?
Well, Paul, once again, this is our first show of the season, and I'm so very pleased because it was you that really expanded in the last few days to take on this new direction for change. And you can smile, but I mean, I have to give you all the credit in the world. And before we get down to the last minute or so, before you say goodbye, we still have a couple of minutes. I'd like you to reiterate a little bit what you opened the program with about where we're going and what we're trying to do.
Sure. It came out of this whole idea of New Year's resolutions, which we all tend to break. And I don't think the words chocolate and New Year's resolution should go in the same sentence. But it came down to that we have this wonderful vehicle, and you've really blessed us with coming to watch and listen to what we're doing every week. And out of a sense of obligation to you, we want to rally your cause, and we want people to engage. We want you to engage. We want to get your families to engage, because out of that engagement, we can get change. People move. Legislators act. People who are doing wrong are going to be called out. And what that does is it becomes an advocacy for caregivers around the world, because it just doesn't happen here. It happens everywhere. And if we get enough people on the same train going in the same direction, 60 to 70 million people strong, people are going to stand up and take notice. And we are your eyes and ears.
All right, Paul, wonderfully said. I'm really excited to see how we're going to begin to implement this. We have less than a minute. So South Florida, America, the world, I want to thank you for listening to the Caregiver Reality Hour. And it's a really important message that Paul and I will be bringing. And Paul?
Thank you very much, caregivers. As I say every week, take care of yourselves. We need you. Get on Facebook for us.
Right. And engage in that change.
Good
Thank
night,
you,
everyone.
Paul. Thank you, Lynette.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Reality Show. Each week, David Levy, a gerontologist, and Paul Vadiato, a caregiver expert with a combined over 25 years of experience, providing practical and realistic help to caregivers struggling to keep up with the needs of a loved one who are unable to care for himself or herself. To reach David Levy, email him at david@caregiverreality.com. Or to reach Paul Vadiato, email paul@caregiverreality.com. And find out more online. Just go to caregiverreality.com. See you next week for another exciting show of Caregiver Reality. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were